defense calls Mr. C. Leighton Davis to the stand. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Morning. My full name is C. Leighton Davis, but that stands for Clayton Leighton Davis, so most folks just call me Clayton.
Mr. Davis, what do you do for a living?
I teach at the University of Georgia Law School. I am the Will Sheet Professor of Election Law.
Can you tell us about some of your qualifications in this field?
Why, sure. I have a JD from Wake Forest University and a PhD in math from the University of Kentucky. Since then, I've been publishing academic papers in election law and election fraud. You talk about any corrupt politics in this country, Tommy Carcetti, Maurice Campbell, I'm there to find the faucet, the source of all these misdoings.
Well, can you explain what exactly is election fraud?
Well, election fraud can mean a lot of things. Anyone can really technically do it. If you vote twice in an election, that's election fraud. If someone tampers with a voting machine, that's election fraud. If a person goes bribing people to gain votes, that's election fraud too. It truly has a lot of definitions.
So what were you called in to look at specifically in this election?
I was called in to run an independent audit of the 2015 mayoral election in Truman Midlands. I was asked to answer 3 questions: whether there had been election fraud, if the election fraud mattered, if it played a result in the outcome of the election, and who, if anyone, was involved. Specifically, I was asked to take a very close look at the mayor, Max Heisman.
Well, when you were investigating these 3 questions, did you have sufficient facts and data?
Oh, sure. I got my team together. I interviewed hundreds of individuals, citizens of the 12th District of Midlands, 12th District of Truman, sorry. And I also took a look at some of the polling data from 2015 and 2011, the last mayoral election that Truman had.
Now, in your field, are there reliable principles and methods to determine if election fraud was present?
Oh, indeed. It's a combination of a couple fields, really. You have to have the law knowledge to know how an election works, but also the mathematics knowledge to create charts and formulas to see what kind of effect any election fraud might have played. You put all that together and you make your conclusions.
So did you apply these principles and methods to the facts and data in today's case?
I sure did.
Well, to start out, can you tell us a little more about Truman?
Sure. It's the capital of the great state of Midlands, home to about 150,000 residents. It's split up into 12 voting districts. The 12th one, Bellevue, that's the one I was most concerned with. It's home to about 13,000 people total. Historically, not the wealthiest district, and for the same reasons, not usually the highest voter turnout rate.
Now, what specific were you examining when you looked at District 12?
Well, a wise man once told me that any audit has to be run in 3 steps: crawl, walk, and then run. Started by crawling, answering the easy question: was there election fraud?
And what did you find? Was there election fraud?
I found that there had been some phone calls going out to the residents of District 12 talking about some voting requirements that definitely weren't true. I also found that there was a man named Casey French running around the day of the election handing out some flyers about other fake voting requirements. That would definitely count as election fraud on the part of Casey French at the very least.
Well, tell us a little more about this individual, Casey French.
From what I found, Mr. French is really a career criminal. He's gone by multiple names, multiple arrests, numerous charges, everything from impersonating a scuba instructor to a cop to an amusement park ride operator. Not much reason or rhyme to his crimes.
You said he was spreading information, so what was he telling people?
Oh, everything from you have to have a college degree to vote, to you have to be a homeowner to vote. Everything short of you must be this tall to vote. Somewhat ridiculous, but I guess if people were fooled by it, it could stop them from taking part in an election.
Now, would that constitute election fraud?
Well, sure. Anytime that an individual is going out there spreading information that isn't true to try to stop people from voting, that's election fraud on the part of that person at the very least. But I had to see if that election fraud mattered, if it played a difference.
Well, how did you go about doing that? How do you determine if the election fraud affected the outcome?
Well, that's where the math comes in. You see, we'll start with the results of the election. Mayor Heisman, the incumbent, won by 223 votes over his challenger, Ms. Elizabeth Ginger. That means, obviously, that Ms. Ginger needed 223 more votes in her favor compared to the Mayor Heisman to cause a tie or a win in her favor.
So you're saying then, if 223 more people had voted in District 12, would Elizabeth Ginger have won?
Well, no, that's not necessarily true. You see, it's not like Ms. Ginger took every single vote in District 12. In the final tally in 2015, she took about 82% of it, but for the purpose of my investigation, I ran a little bit conservatively, said that Ms. Ginger would have taken 90, which was one of the recent polls up leading to the election. That was 90 for Ms. Ginger compared to 9% for Mayor Heisman. So that's an 81% difference. What you're really saying is that for every more person who voted, Ms. Ginger gained 0.81 votes, the difference.
So after we did all the math, how many more people would have had to have voted for Elizabeth Ginger to have won?
Assuming Ms. Ginger would have taken 90% of those votes, she would have needed 276 more voters to get to the polls. That's 223 that she needed. Divided by 0.81, you get 276.
Now, is it possible that the election fraud you've told us about would have kept 276 people from voting?
Well, that's incredibly dependent on the kind of voter turnout that you're expecting. Voter turnout usually relates somewhat to the the total of registered voters that there is in the district. In Truman in 2011, we saw District 12 have a 19% voter turnout rate.
Now, would you expect that voter turnout to stay roughly the same in 2015?
It usually stays the same, referring to the voter turnout compared to registered voters. Now, based on voter excitement, you might get more people going to register, but usually, absent some changes, we find that the percentage of registered voters who turn out usually stays somewhat stable.
Well, were your predictions correct? Did about 19.5% of registered voters vote in the 2015 mayoral election?
Actually, while the registration numbers went up, only 15% of registered voters went to the polls and voted that day.
Now, if 19.5% of the voters had voted, like you said you'd expect, would that have changed the election?
Well, if all of these new registered voters hadn't been just part of some get-out-to-vote registration campaign and actually had gone to the polls in significant numbers, 19.5%, we would have seen Ms. Ginger gain 287 votes, narrowly enough to swing the election.
Now, you said the third thing you were looking for was whether or not Max Heisman was involved. Now, what did you find for that prong of your investigation?
We spoke with Mayor Heisman. To his credit, he was pretty forthcoming and cooperative with us, and we found some things out about his prior career.
What did you find out?
Well, Mayor Heisman, like many in politics, was a public defender back in the day, coming out of law school. A couple times he represented that man, Casey French. Not too surprising, it sounds like Mr. French has been in darn near every courtroom in the state of Midlands.
Well, how about the rest of Max Heisman's campaign? Did you investigate them?
I did. I really took a look at everyone involved, but only one individual, a former campaign staffer by the name of Sam Ziegler, alleged any dirt in the Heisman campaign. However, I didn't put much credit in that. It seemed like Ms. Ziegler was a little bit bitter about her status as a former campaign staffer. Not to mention, her claims weren't backed up in much of the other evidence that I reviewed.
Mr. Davis, in the course of your investigation, did you find any information whatsoever that Max Heisman participated in or directed activities of election fraud?
Nothing credible, no.
No further questions, Your Honor.